Hello and welcome to our webcast for October 6, 2016. My name is Christian Today. Oh, sorry, I lost one full year. Sorry, 17. Okay. I lost one full year. I don't know what I do with it, but whatever. My name is
All
Christian
right, it's Friday.
I'm the joker of the week. Okay. And this is Amy Asbrook, the director of Toujours Vivant at Dead Yet.
Well, I can't keep my mouth shut.
And please present our
And this
guest.
is Taylor Hyatt, who is our assistant and who puts together the text for our online
So
webcast.
when I ask to somebody else to do my job, I don't do any mistake.
Right.
Okay. Toujours Vivant Not Dead Yet is a non-religious organization by and for people with disabilities and our allies. To inform, unify, and give voice to the disability rights opposition to assisted suicide, euthanasia, and other ending of life practices that discriminates against people with disabilities. Today's topics, we have two: review of Canada disability right legislation, the Quebec part, that continues over Canada disability rights legislation.
Right.
The second one is 3 disabled siblings murdered by their parent in Utah. So it's a very sad subject.
Yeah.
Sorry. Amy will talk about it and we try to comment.
Okay. So welcome back to our review of disability legislation across Canada. This week we're looking at Quebec's legislation. The Act to ensure the exercise of the rights of persons with disabilities originally came into effect in 1978. Actually, they said handicapped persons, but we...
Yeah, but in 1978, it was kind of a very, what is the
progressive.
Well, progressive.
Avant-garde.
Yeah, avant-garde or progressive for the Canada, okay? Yeah. That's nice. That there is nice parts over there, and there is a sad part too.
Yeah. The law not only guaranteed equal rights, but also included programs and services to increase the participation of disabled people in society. It also featured a broad definition of disability based on the ability to function in the environment, an approach that would later be adopted by the United Nations.
Which is very nice,
right.
Very good. But just look at one detail. They talk about only the handicapped people. The target is the handicapped people, not
right.
the society.
Right, exactly. The law is directed at people with disabilities, and it is trying to do both providing services and removing barriers, but it ends up not doing either one very well.
Yeah, well, when you try to hit 2 or 3 targets at the same time, sometimes you miss all.
Yeah, exactly. It originally contained plans to improve accessibility of sidewalks, parking, housing, public transportation, and telephone services. Its biggest accomplishment, though, was the creation of the Office of Persons with Disabilities. Yeah. And I'll use the acronym that we use in Quebec, OPHQ.
Yeah. You just have to look all the new sidewalk build, which are quite a lot in Montreal now. All are in a slope to the street, which is one of the effects of this OPHQ things. Yeah. But it's not the only one, but this one is very visible.
Right, right. The OPHQ was responsible for coordinating and promoting resources needed by people with disabilities within the government, municipalities, and public and private sectors. These included housing, goods and services, employment, transit, education, recreation, and cultural activities.
A very wide range of things.
Right. So again, it's trying to provide services, and it's trying to break down barriers, and it's a broad range of doing things. And the other thing is, when an agency is providing services on the one hand, and on the other hand trying to be representing people who are need their rights defended, sometimes it can be a conflict of interest, because if you need help getting services, but the OPHQ is the one that's not giving you the service you need, that's where you hit the problems.
Yeah.
Right.
The office could prepare service plans to help individuals access education, employment, and rehabilitation, as well as grant subsidies and write employment contracts to encourage hiring disabled people. It was also responsible for doing research and publishing statistics about Quebec's disabled population, and it certainly does publish a lot of studies. But one thing that it does, that happens in Quebec, is that employers get subsidies to hire disabled people. And while on the one hand, it's good that disabled people get jobs, on the other hand, that sends a bad message. That sends a message that disabled employees aren't as good as non-disabled employees. And
Right.
so they have to be paid, employer has to be paid to hire them. And that has a longer term effect, I think, that's negative. And so,
Right, because you're not being hired on your merits only because there's this extra incentive in place.
yes, exactly. Exactly. So, especially because those subsidies are temporary, they're not permanent. A lot of times what happens is a disabled person is hired and they work for a certain amount of time, but the company can't afford to continue to pay them without the subsidy. So they lose the person loses their job and the company loses their work. The Act ensures the exercise of, the Act to ensure the exercise of rights of persons with disabilities received a major update in 2004. And
So we are in 21st century.
2017.
Yeah, but in 20,
First century, yeah.
supposed to be modern and
Right.
progressive and so on and so on.
Right. So here's the language that's used in the Act to describe the object of the law. The object of this Act is to secure handicapped persons in the exercise of their rights, and through the involvement of government departments and their networks, municipalities, and public and private agencies, to help them integrate into society to the same extent as other citizens by providing for various measures to apply specifically to handicapped persons and their families, their living environments, and the development and organization of resources and services for them. So again, it's focusing on the disabled people rather than on making the environment accessible.
Exactly.
And yes, people need services to cope with an inaccessible environment. And that's, but it kind
But
of,
that's a case by case
right,
patient. You have to
Right.
keep doing that over and over.
exactly, right. And it also misses the point of having a rights legislation, which is to remove the impediments to exercising those rights. And Quebec is a little, this law doesn't quite have that idea square in its sights.
Yeah, it's kind of the opposite. They are very paternalist.
Right. And the other thing about OPHQ is, and the Quebec law, is that it considers people with disabilities and their families as equal. But oftentimes the interests of disabled people are different and conflict with those of their families. So for example, somebody wants to move out and live on their own, but the family is receiving a subsidy to take care of the person and doesn't want to lose that subsidy. And the parents are a little overprotective and don't want the kids to move out. So
In there.
that can be a problem. So, okay. So the OPHQ's main role changed to evaluating services and policies affecting people with disabilities. It can also advise organizations about accessibility measures to make sure they are followed. No incentives are offered for organizations to comply with the office's recommendations.
So we have a donkey, but no carrots and no whip.
Right.
Oh.
Mhm.
You can just encourage, come on, come on, come on, come on, come on.
The donkey doesn't want to move.
Right.
Nothing happens.
Of course he won't.
Yeah, exactly. An independent report on the law's implementation must be published every 5 years, according to the law. But since the 2004 update, only one report has been published, and that was in 2012.
Whoops.
So, you know,
It doesn't follow the law.
right. OPHQ is the centerpiece of this law, and OPHQ is not complying with the law.
Yeah, so.
Oh, that's a little, yeah, okay.
Backwards there.
Little bit awkward.
Yeah. One of the major additions of the 2004 law was the development of annual action plans for government departments with more than 50 employees and municipalities with more than 15,000 residents.
So it's most of the
Right. Most of the government
government thing,
and
yeah.
most local government, a lot of local governments,
well,
not
yeah.
all. Little towns don't, but.
Yeah.
These documents must describe what has been done to improve accessibility in the past year and plans for the upcoming year, plans for improving accessibility. However, there is no penalty for failing to submit or comply with a plan, and if no plan is submitted, the organization may receive reminder letters and phone calls.
Very
Right.
efficient.
Right, and
Very, very efficient.
it's
Sorry.
they may receive phone calls and letters,
They-
and those
And you
phone
can-
calls and letters just, you know, please.
Yeah. The, yeah.
Go ahead, Taylor.
I was going to say you can just ignore those.
Yeah, exactly. You know, they call up, have you submitted? Click. Transit companies were also supposed to submit accessibility improvement plans to the provincial government by 2005. As of 2011, 6 years later, only 16 of 34
Less than half.
agencies throughout Quebec
After
had
6
done,
years.
had done so. Some authorities assumed paratransit is sufficient, but anyone who uses paratransit will tell you that is not the case.
I'm a witness.
Yeah.
For
Yeah, fair
Ottawa system.
Go ahead.
Go Taylor.
Go ahead.
Sorry. For Ottawa's system, you have to make your reservation the day before you want to travel. You're stuck on the phone for a couple hours really early in the morning, and I've called over 150 times.
Oh,
Ouch.
And if you are too early waiting, or if they show up too early or too late, you're either left waiting a long time or you're cutting social events short.
mm,
So this is the efficiency of the handicap transport.
Right.
Yes, miss.
right.
Good efficiency.
It's supposed to be equivalent to regular transport. Ha ha ha.
Ha ha.
Right.
Yeah, assuming everybody plans a day in advance for all their transport
Yeah,
needs.
yeah, yeah. You always know what you will do the next day. Always.
Okay. Physical access to buildings has been part of the Quebec Construction Code since 1976, meaning that new buildings were supposed to be accessible. Accessibility standards only applied to new buildings at first, though requirements for older buildings were eventually added. Reasonable efforts to improve accessibility only apply to major renovations on some buildings. So, and I read an article that I put up on our Facebook page about a guy who uses a wheelchair, who's a developer, and he built a new housing unit, you know, new construction housing apartment building, and it was not accessible. And in 2012, He didn't comply with the law, and he couldn't get into it himself. It's really bizarre.
How was he supposed to survey it that way?
Yeah, really. Definitely a hands-on manager, that guy.
Yeah. A good one, yeah.
A 2006 report from the Ministry of Labor surveyed physical accessibility of buildings in Montreal, Quebec, and Shawinigan. An average of 54% of public sector buildings, like schools, hospitals, and government agencies were accessible.
54%.
Yeah.
Okay, the government followed its own rule only 60,
Half
50.
half the time.
Yeah, half the time, plus or minus, okay.
Okay, only 13% of schools, and we're trying to integrate disabled people in schools, and only 13% of schools and 26% of vocational training centers were accessible.
Yeah, and those training centers are where you train people to make sure that they could have a job.
Profession. Yeah.
Okay,
Right.
26% at
Right.
most.
Yeah.
Ooh,
Restaurants,
yeah, nice.
arenas, and event venues have a compliance rate of 45%. 59% of stores were accessible, as were 25% of apartment buildings, rooming houses, and hotels.
59% of stores, better than the government.
Right,
Oh, special.
right,
When you have to sell something, you do better than the government. That's great.
right. Well, you know, stores, private businesses turn over relatively frequently, and they have to do renovations, so supposedly they would have to make things accessible. That's the theory.
Yeah.
So that may be why there's more access. But in terms of apartment buildings and roommate houses and hotels, only 25% are accessible, which is pretty terrible. And there was no follow-up on the survey. So they did this survey. Here's the information.
Never did anything with it.
Yeah.
And because the number was so bad, it doesn't produce the next one.
Right.
Right. And they only dealt with physical accessibility and not access for intellectual and psychological conditions.
Right, exactly.
Right, we agree. So they miss a whole point about it.
Yeah, right. As if access is only about physical disability.
Right.
Finally, the 1978 law required the OPHQ establish and maintain a database of accessible housing, which never happened. The 2004 Act replaced that requirement with the vague obligation to, quote, ensure the implementation of means facilitating the search for housing for people with disabilities.
Yeah, a lower living possible.
Yeah,
okay.
Basically nothing. There are far more people looking for suitable housing than there is housing available. How can you search for something that may not exist? A renovation funding program is available, but wait lists are years long.
Very, very long.
And funds often don't cover the costs of the work, and renters who wish to make access changes have to negotiate with landlords who may require that the property be restored to its original condition when they move out.
Yeah, so sometimes you receive your money to do the renovation,
Right.
and you have moved twice since that time.
Right, exactly. Right. And yeah. Or you make the renovations and your landlord decides to raise the rent beyond what you can pay, and you have to move.
And to put back the
property the way it was.
Yeah, so
undo all the work.
Something is very, very fishy about that kind of thing.
Yeah. Disabled activists have continued to pressure the government and businesses to provide access to goods, programs, and services. A class action lawsuit is underway against Montreal's public transit agency for failing to make the metro accessible.
No, only 9 stations over something like 70 stations.
Yeah, something like that.
That's worse than Toronto.
What's that?
Toronto's rate. And I thought Toronto was bad.
Yeah. Well, and the worst is that a lot of the metro in Montreal was built after 1976.
Yeah.
So after the law came into effect.
And there is some bad will because they say, oh, elevator will cost $9 million to build, and so on, so on. I don't think something to make accessible some station will cost so many million.
Right.
It exists a thing like Acorn who could do it for $5,000 for each there or something like that. It will never reach $1 million.
Right. The opposition campaign for mayor in Montreal is promising access by 2030 to the whole system. And I think that's pretty unreasonable. I think they're exaggerating their claims, but people are really excited about it. So, yeah, I don't.
Yeah, 2030. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I will be there.
Right. So the class action deals with the lack of access to the metro and also the chronic problems with the accessible buses and paratransit services. So working on this stuff, and they're not satisfied with the law as it stands in Quebec and are still pushing for better access laws. Okay, our next topic is 3 disabled siblings are murdered by their parents in Utah. The Washington Post recently published a story about the quote-unquote peaceful deaths of 3 young people in Utah. Christopher, Elizabeth, and James Chappell, aged 20, 19, and 15, all had Batten disease. The condition's progress meant that the siblings had visual, physical, and cognitive disabilities. They used wheelchairs and feeding tubes, which the article called life support.
Yeah, they call it peaceful because it doesn't use gun to kill them.
Right.
Like, hey, it is.
Right, but you know, if they were other non-disabled kids, that would be called murder. It would be called murder by neglect or whatever. But because they're disabled, it's called a peaceful death.
Yeah.
So this is what the parents did, and that was incredibly wrong. When Christopher began to need tube feeding, his parents felt that it would only quote, keep his body alive, unquote. They began to reconsider the, quote, choice, unquote, they had made for their other kids. And the question that arises is, in what other circumstance is the possibility of not feeding your child legitimate?
Yeah.
And
it's very cruel.
In July, the parents decided to sedate their children and stop feeding them. All 3 died over the course of a weekend. Legal authorities looked the other way, believing this to be a, quote, tragic, but, quote, understandable, unquote, response to the siblings' disabilities. So this is the parents behaving badly, and now it's the authorities, the prosecutor, the police, the government behaving badly as well by not prosecuting the parents. The article used extremely ableist language, at one point mentioning the remaining sentient siblings sharing memories of the ones who had been killed. So this is not only the parents behaving badly, not only the police and the government behaving badly, now it's the journalists behaving badly.
Yeah.
This is, really awful.
They also referred to them as children the whole time when 2 of them were of age.
Right.
It could do a very nice scenario for a horror movie,
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, it would be a good scenario for a horror movie. The story is told from the parents' point of view, and the reporter clearly sympathizes with the parents. while viewing the disabled young people as non-humans and objects. Nor does the reporter question the lack of response of the criminal justice system to the starvation death of 3 people. So not only does the reporter not question or not criticize the parents, he also doesn't criticize the authorities for not acting on the murder.
Right.
This story is similar to the Latimer case in Canada. In 1993, Robert Latimer killed his daughter Tracy, who had cerebral palsy. He claimed he wanted to keep her from suffering and, quote, enduring, unquote, what he considered a very limited quality of life. And did you want to say anything about that, Taylor?
Yes. I was only a year old when Tracy died, and I grew up hearing about her in the news. I have the same disability that she had, even though it affected us in very different ways, and even though I have a loving family that would never look down on me to the point of killing me, knowing that someone with the same disability as me was treated so badly really hit home growing up.
Yeah. I had a similar experience when we heard about a woman in the Netherlands who was euthanized because she was losing her. She was legally blind and she was losing more sight, and that was a reason enough to euthanize her. It gets very personal for us, and people say, well, you know, your work is so hard, why do you do it? It's, well, personal.
We feel the need to keep other people.
So if you live in sorry.
Taylor.
We feel the need to keep other people from going through the same thing, and to some degree there's a self-identification. Oh no, that could have been me.
Right, exactly. Yep.
If you live in Utah and you are handicapped, your life is in danger.
No, it's not just Utah, because it happened in with Latimer.
Yeah, but
it happened in Montreal. It happened.
Yeah, but it's a little bit more awful in Utah.
No. That's the problem. It happens everywhere. You didn't read my paper. There's a case in Montreal where this happened. A parent killed a child who was autistic, a 6-year-old.
Yeah, recently.
Yeah, so it doesn't matter where it is. It happens everywhere. That's the problem. Okay, Latimer was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. The sentence was challenged and ultimately upheld by the Supreme Court of Canada in 2001. He was paroled in 2010, and now he gets to go on TV, and they have under his name Right to Die advocate.
Yeah, an expert. Yeah, he killed somebody.
Right to kill would be more accurate for him.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I could just see Charles Manson going on TV as a Right to Die advocate.
Yeah.
So.
No comment.
Let's see. So, where are we at here? Oh, if you want more information about the topics we discuss here, you can go to our Facebook page, and we have a lot of stuff on our Facebook page at facebook.com/toujours-vivant, not dead yet. Visit our website at tvndy.ca. You can also send us an email at info@tv-ndy.ca, or you can follow us on Twitter @TVNDY. Thanks to Taylor for preparing our script today. Yay! For helping out too. And
to interrupt.
Right. For interrupting, yes. And we'll see you all next time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Have a nice week. Bye.
Have a good week, everyone.